My name is Mark Reynolds. There was a time in my life when I wouldn't have believed it myself. But here I am, and trust me, what I'm about to share will change the way you think about life and what comes after it. I was just an ordinary guy, living an ordinary life, or so I thought. I'm 42 years old, a husband, and a father of two amazing kids. I worked as a project manager for a construction company in Denver. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Like most people, I had dreams when I was younger, big ones, but somewhere along the way, those dreams faded into the background. Life, with all its demands and disappointments, took over. On the outside, everything seemed fine. I had a decent house, a reliable car, and a family that loved me. But inside, I was crumbling. My wife, Sarah, noticed it first. She'd ask me why I seemed so distant, why I'd stopped laughing like I used to. I didn't have an answer for her. Maybe it was the stress at work or the feeling that I'd never really accomplished anything significant. Maybe it was the gnawing emptiness I felt every time I looked in the mirror. Faith wasn't a part of my life. I grew up going to church, Sunday mornings with my parents, Bible school in the summer. But as I got older, faith became just another thing I didn't have time for. Life was busy, and God felt distant, like a childhood friend you lose touch with. I told myself I didn't need him, that I could handle everything on my own. I'd hear people talk about finding peace through prayer or leaning on God during hard times, and honestly, it just made me roll my eyes. I didn't have time for that kind of thing. I had deadlines to meet, bills to pay, and kids to drive to soccer practice. I wasn't against the idea of God. I just didn't think he had anything to do with me. But life has a way of bringing you to your knees, doesn't it? That's exactly what happened to me. Looking back, I can see the signs now, little warnings I ignored. But at the time, I was too stubborn to listen, too caught up in my own world to see the bigger picture. And then it happened. That day, the day that changed everything. One minute, I was driving home from work, my mind racing with thoughts about deadlines and invoices. The next, I was standing at the edge of eternity, staring into the eyes of someone I never thought I'd meet. Let me tell you, it wasn't heaven I saw first. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that feels like it's dragging on forever. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the rush hour traffic was already beginning to build. I was driving home after another grueling day at the construction site, my mind more focused on the stack of paperwork waiting for me at home than on the road ahead. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another email notification. I glanced at it just for a second. That's all it took. 1 second. When I looked back up, the world seemed to explode in slow motion. A truck had veered into my lane, its horn blaring like a siren from hell. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The sound of metal crunching against metal was deafening, like the roar of a thunderstorm. The force of the impact jolted me forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest so hard I could barely breathe. My head snapped back, hitting the headrest with a sickening thud, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the world around me was chaos. Smoke billowed from the hood of my car, filling the air with the acrid stench of burning oil and rubber. Shattered glass sparkled like tiny stars scattered across the dashboard and the pavement outside. I could hear muffled voices, shouting, panicked, but they seemed distant, like they were coming from underwater. My body felt heavy, pinned to the seat by an invisible weight. I tried to move, but pain shot through me, sharp and unrelenting. My chest ached with every shallow breath, and my legs felt like they were trapped in a vice. Blood trickled down my forehead, warm and sticky, blurring my vision as it dripped into my eyes. Help! Someone! The words barely escaped my lips, weak and broken. My throat felt dry, raw, as if I'd swallowed sandpaper. Then came the fear. It crept up slowly at first, like a shadow inching closer. But as the seconds passed and the reality of the situation sank in, it hit me like a tidal wave. I was trapped. The driver's side door was crushed, mangled beyond recognition, and the steering wheel was pressed tightly against my chest. Every breath felt like a battle. I could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. But would they make it in time? Would I make it? That's when the strangest thing happened. Amid the chaos, the pain, and the fear, a strange calm began to wash over me. It wasn't the kind of calm you'd expect, not a sense of peace or reassurance. It was more like a numbness, as if my mind was disconnecting from my body. The sounds around me grew muffled, fading into the background, and the pain started to dull, as though it were miles away. And then, it happened. The air inside the car grew thick, almost tangible, like it was pressing against me from all sides. The dim light filtering through the smoky windshield began to shift, growing brighter, sharper. At first, I thought it was the headlights of an oncoming vehicle, but this light was different. It didn't shine, it radiated. It wasn't just bright, it felt alive. Before I could process what was happening, the light enveloped me, pulling me into its embrace. It was warm, almost comforting, but there was an intensity to it, a power that felt both overwhelming and awe-inspiring. My vision blurred, and the world around me began to dissolve. The smoke, the shattered glass, the mangled metal, it all faded away, replaced by a strange, weightless void. I felt myself floating, untethered, as if gravity no longer applied to me. And then came the memories. They hit me like a flood, one after another, playing out before me like scenes from a movie. Moments I hadn't thought about in years. My mother's laughter as she baked cookies in the kitchen. The first time I held my son in my arms, his tiny fingers gripping mine. The look of disappointment on Sarah's face when I missed yet another family dinner because I was working late. Each memory came with its own weight, its own emotion. Joy, regret, love, guilt. They all swirled together, leaving me breathless. I wanted to reach out, to hold on to the good moments, to push away the bad. But I couldn't. I was just an observer, powerless to change anything. Then, as quickly as it started, the memories stopped, and the void around me began to shift. The warmth of the light gave way to something colder, darker. The sense of weightlessness disappeared, replaced by a sinking feeling, as though I were being pulled downward into an endless abyss. The darkness wasn't empty. It was alive. I could feel it pressing against me, suffocating me, filling every corner of my being with an overwhelming sense of dread. And in that darkness, I heard it, a voice, low, guttural, and dripping with malice. "Mark Reynolds, do you know where you are?" The voice sent chills down my spine. It wasn't a question, it was a taunt. And in that moment, I realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't just a near-death experience. This was something else entirely. This was judgment. The darkness felt endless, pressing down on me like the weight of every regret, every mistake I'd ever made. My heart, or whatever part of me still existed, raced with a mixture of fear and confusion. Was this it? Was this death? But then, just as suddenly as the darkness had swallowed me, it began to crack. A pinprick of light appeared in the distance. Faint at first, but growing steadily brighter. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen before. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft and inviting, as though it were calling to me. Before I could even process what was happening, I felt myself being drawn toward it. It wasn't like walking or floating. It was more like being carried by an invisible current, pulled effortlessly toward the source of the light. The darkness receded, peeling away like layers of an old, forgotten memory. And with each layer that fell away, I felt lighter, as if the burdens I'd carried in life were being stripped from me. When I finally reached the light, it enveloped me completely. I was no longer aware of my body. No pain, no weight, no barriers. It was as if I were pure thought, pure essence, immersed in a presence so powerful and overwhelming that words fail to capture it. The light wasn't just around me. It was within me, filling every corner of my being with a warmth and love I had never known. And then I heard it, a voice. Not like the dark, menacing voice I'd heard before, but something entirely different. It wasn't a sound so much as a knowing, a presence that communicated directly to the deepest part of me. "Mark," it said, gentle yet commanding, like the voice of a loving father. "You are safe. Do not be afraid." At that moment, a flood of emotions washed over me: relief, gratitude, awe. The fear that had gripped me moments ago melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. I didn't question who the voice belonged to. Somehow, I just knew. This was God. The light around me began to shift, taking on new forms. Colors I couldn't even name danced and shimmered, creating landscapes more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen on Earth. Rolling meadows of golden grass stretched out before me, kissed by a breeze that seemed to hum with life. Rivers of crystal clear water flowed, their surfaces sparkling like diamonds. And the sky? It wasn't blue or grey like ours, it was alive, pulsating with hues of gold, silver, and radiant white. The air itself seemed to sing, a melody so pure and harmonious it brought tears, or what felt like tears, to my eyes. Every part of this place, every sight, sound, and sensation, was filled with a love so profound it was almost unbearable. It was like being wrapped in the arms of someone who truly, deeply, and unconditionally loved me, flaws and all. I felt a presence beside me, and when I turned, I saw them, angels. They weren't like the depictions I'd seen in paintings or movies. There were no halos or feathered wings. They were beings of light, their forms radiant and almost translucent, emanating a sense of wisdom and grace that was both humbling and comforting. They didn't speak with words, but their presence communicated everything I needed to know. I was welcome here, and I was loved. One of them extended a hand, not physically, but in a way that felt like an invitation. And as I accepted, my surroundings shifted again. We were now standing in a vast hall, its walls lined with what looked like endless bookshelves. Each book seemed to glow, its cover shimmering with light. "This is the book of life," the angel said, the voice resonating directly in my mind. "Every moment, every choice, every thought is recorded here." As the angel gestured, one of the books floated down, opening before me. It was my book, my life laid bare. The pages turned on their own, revealing memories I had long forgotten. Moments of joy, moments of sorrow, moments I was proud of, and moments I wished I could erase. The angel didn't judge me, but I could feel the weight of my own actions. The times I had chosen selfishness over kindness. The times I had ignored the needs of others. But there were also moments of grace. Times when I had shown love, even when it was difficult. "Every life is a tapestry," the angel said, "a blend of light and shadow. What matters is what you learn from it." And then came the revelation, a truth so simple yet so profound that it shook me to my core. Life is about love. Not the fleeting, conditional love we often chase, but a love that is selfless, enduring, and divine. A love that reflects God's own heart. Tears streamed down my face as I realized how often I had missed this truth. How often I had let anger, pride, or fear overshadow the love I was meant to give and receive. The angel placed a hand, or what felt like a hand, on my shoulder. "Mark, your journey is not yet over. There is more for you to see." Before I could respond, the scene around me began to change again. The light dimmed slightly, and I found myself standing in what felt like a courtroom. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with a sense of solemnity. In the center of the room stood a figure I instantly recognized, though I had never seen him before. Judas Iscariot. He was nothing like I had imagined. He didn't have horns or a menacing glare. He looked human, worn, broken, and deeply sorrowful. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a pain so deep it was almost unbearable. I was loved too, he said, his voice trembling. I walked with him, saw his miracles, felt his grace, but I let greed and fear consume me. I betrayed the one who loved me most. His confession pierced my soul. Here was a man who had been in the very presence of Jesus, who had known him intimately, and yet had fallen. His story wasn't just one of betrayal, it was one of regret, a cautionary tale about the choices we make and the paths they lead us down. But even in my fall, Judas continued, his love never wavered. It was I who turned away, unable to forgive myself. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. They weren't just for him, they were for me, for all of us. How often do we let guilt and shame keep us from accepting God's love? How often do we turn away, believing we're unworthy? As I stood there, the light returned, filling the room with its warmth. And in that light, I heard God's voice once more. Mark, you are loved beyond measure. Go back and tell them. Tell them of my love, of my mercy, of the purpose I have for each of them. The next thing I knew, I was falling, not in fear, but in surrender. The light faded, the warmth receded, and I found myself gasping for air, back in my broken body, surrounded by paramedics and flashing lights. But I was no longer the same. I had seen the truth. I had felt the love, and I knew my life could never be the same again. I woke up to the sound of beeping machines and the faint murmur of voices. My chest felt heavy, each breath labored, as if I were dragging my soul back into a body that didn't quite fit anymore. The sterile smell of the hospital filled my senses, grounding me in the reality that I had returned. For a moment, I didn't open my eyes. Part of me wasn't ready to face this world again. The weight of what I had seen, what I had felt, was almost too much to bear. How could I go back to being the person I was before, knowing what I now knew? When I finally opened my eyes, Sarah was there, sitting by my bedside. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The moment she saw me stir, she jumped to her feet, grabbing my hand as tears streamed down her face. "Mark, you're awake?" she sobbed, her voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I thought I'd lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. Instead, I squeezed her hand, hoping she could feel the gratitude and love I couldn't yet put into words. As I looked into her tear-filled eyes, a wave of emotion washed over me. How many times had I taken this woman for granted? How many moments had I wasted, letting my own pride and distractions keep me from truly appreciating her? The doctors came in, their voices clinical and detached as they rattled off my injuries. A fractured rib, a concussion, bruises, and cuts. They called my survival a miracle, given the severity of the crash. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a second chance. Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, the memories of my experience in the afterlife stayed with me, vivid and unshakable. I replayed every detail in my mind: the light, the angels, the voice of God, and Judas's haunting confession. It was as if those moments had been etched into my very soul, impossible to forget. At first, I struggled to put it all into perspective. How could I explain what I had seen? How could I share something so profound without sounding crazy? Even Sarah, as much as she loved me, would probably think I'd imagined it all, a hallucination brought on by the trauma of the accident. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that staying silent wasn't an option. I had been given a gift, a glimpse of eternity, a message from God Himself. To keep it to myself would be selfish. I had to share it, no matter the cost. When I finally told Sarah, she listened quietly, her hand never letting go of mine. At first, her expression was one of disbelief, but as I continued, describing the light, the angels, and the overwhelming love I felt, something shifted in her eyes. By the time I spoke about Judas and his confession, tears were streaming down her face. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do you really think it was real? That you saw God?" I nodded, the conviction in my heart stronger than any doubt. It wasn't just real, Sarah. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced. And it's changed everything. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, stepping back into the world felt both familiar and foreign. The sun seemed brighter, the air fresher, and every sound, from the chirping of birds to the rustling of leaves, carried a weight I'd never noticed before. Everything felt alive, imbued with a sense of purpose and meaning. But with this newfound clarity came a deep sense of responsibility. How could I live my life the same way, knowing what I now knew? How could I go back to being the man who ignored his family, buried himself in work, and dismissed the existence of God? The first thing I did was apologize. To Sarah, to my kids, even to my co-workers. I didn't just say the words, I meant them. I sat down with my wife and admitted all the ways I had failed her, all the times I had let my own selfishness get in the way of our marriage. I told my kids how much I loved them, how proud I was of them, and how I would never take another moment with them for granted. At work, I scaled back my hours, prioritizing my family and my faith over deadlines and promotions. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard. But every time I felt myself slipping back into my old ways, I remembered the light, the voice, and the love that had surrounded me in that otherworldly realm. It was like an anchor, keeping me grounded in what truly mattered. Of course, not everyone understood my transformation. Some of my friends thought I'd lost my mind. They listened politely as I shared my story, but quickly changed the subject, uncomfortable with the idea of life after death, or the existence of a higher power. At work, my boss questioned my reduced hours, hinting that I wasn't as committed as I used to be. And even Sarah, as supportive as she was, struggled at times to fully grasp the depth of my experience. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I could really live up to the message I had been given. The world is loud, full of distractions and temptations that pull you in 1,000 directions. But every time I felt myself faltering, I returned to prayer, a practice I had abandoned long ago, but now found to be a lifeline. Slowly, word began to spread about my experience. Friends of friends would call, curious to hear my story. Some came out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, but almost all of them left with a look of quiet reflection on their faces. One night, a man I barely knew from work knocked on my door. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped with the weight of some unseen burden. "I heard about what happened to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I believe in God, but I need help. My marriage is falling apart, and I don't know where else to turn." We talked for hours, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly being used for something greater than myself. I didn't have all the answers, but I shared my story, the lessons I had learned, and the love I had felt in the presence of God. By the time he left, he looked lighter, as if some of the weight he carried had been lifted. The most profound change was in my faith. It was no longer a distant, abstract concept. It was the foundation of everything I did. I started going back to church, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to grow closer to the God who had given me a second chance. I read the Bible with fresh eyes, each passage brimming with meaning I had never seen before. But the transformation wasn't just about faith. It was about love. Real, selfless, unconditional love. I made it my mission to show that love to everyone I encountered, from my family to strangers. Whether it was through a kind word, a helping hand, or simply listening to someone's struggles, I tried to live out the message I had been given, that life is about love, and love is the closest we can come to understanding God. It's been a year since the accident, and not a day goes by that I don't think about that experience. It's shaped every decision I've made, every interaction I've had. I'm not perfect. I still stumble, still wrestle with doubt and fear. But I no longer feel alone. I know that I am loved, not just by my family, but by the Creator of the universe. And that knowledge gives me strength. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Life is a gift, and every moment is an opportunity to reflect the love of God. Whether it's through forgiveness, kindness, or simply being present with the people you care about, we are all called to be vessels of that love. And that's what I want to leave you with today. You are loved, you are valued, and no matter what you've done or where you've been, there is always a path back to grace. I want to leave you with this thought. Life is fragile, fleeting, and precious. My experience taught me that every breath we take, every relationship we nurture, every act of kindness or selfishness, it all matters. We live in a world that often distracts us from the things that truly hold value, pulling us into cycles of busyness, materialism, and self-centeredness. But in the end, none of that goes with us. What remains is the love we gave, the faith we nurtured, and the lives we touched. If you've made it this far, you might be wondering why I'm sharing such a personal and, for some, unbelievable story. It's because I know how easy it is to lose sight of what really matters. I know how it feels to drift through life, disconnected from your purpose, from your faith, and from the people you love. And I also know what it's like to be given a second chance. You don't have to wait for a life-altering event to change your perspective. You don't need to face death to realize the beauty and significance of the life you've been given. The lessons I learned in that otherworldly realm are lessons you can embrace right here, right now. If there's one universal truth I took away from my experience, it's this. Love is the essence of life. It's the thread that connects us to one another and to God. But love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. It's in the forgiveness you offer to someone who hurt you, the patience you show to a child, the kindness you extend to a stranger. Think about the people in your life, your family, your friends, your co-workers. Are you showing them the kind of love that reflects God's own heart? Are you making time for them, truly listening, and cherishing the moments you have together? Or are you letting pride, anger, or indifference create distance? Remember, love is a choice. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. My encounter with God didn't just change the way I view love, it changed the way I view faith. For so long, I saw faith as optional, a nice to have for people who needed a crutch to get through hard times. But now I see it as the foundation, the anchor that keeps us grounded when life's storms threaten to sweep us away. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting in the one who does. It's about surrendering your fears, your doubts, and your pain to a God who loves you more than you can imagine. It's about opening your heart to His presence and allowing Him to guide you, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. If you've been distant from your faith, if you've let the busyness of life or the pain of past experiences pull you away, I encourage you to take a step back. Take a moment to pray, to reflect, and to seek God. He's not far away. He's waiting, arms wide open, ready to welcome you home. What will you do with the time you have left? That's the question I ask myself every day now. Will you live for yourself, chasing things that will one day fade away? Or will you live with purpose, seeking to love, serve, and glorify the one who created you? I'm not here to preach at you or tell you how to live your life, but I am here to tell you that your life matters. Every choice you make, every interaction you have, is an opportunity to reflect the light of God into a world that desperately needs it. Maybe you're carrying a burden right now, a broken relationship, a dream that feels out of reach, a wound that hasn't healed. Maybe you feel like you've strayed too far, made too many mistakes, or burned too many bridges. Let me remind you of what I learned during my journey. It's never too late. God's love is limitless, His mercy unending. No matter where you've been or what you've done, He is always ready to meet you where you are and lead you to where you're meant to be. As I sit here, sharing this story with you, I'm struck by how different my life is now. I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes, still wrestle with doubts. But my perspective has shifted. I no longer see life as something to endure, but as something to cherish, a gift, a blessing, and a responsibility. If my story resonates with you, if it stirs something in your heart, I urge you to take a step toward the light. It doesn't matter how small that step is. What matters is that you take it. Maybe it's reaching out to someone you've hurt. Maybe it's spending time in prayer or opening the Bible for the first time in years. Maybe it's simply saying, God, I'm here. Show me the way. The journey of faith isn't always easy, but it's the most rewarding path you'll ever walk. And you don't have to do it alone. God is with you every step of the way, offering His love, His grace, and His guidance. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to live with greater love, deeper faith, and a renewed sense of purpose. Remember, you are loved more than you can possibly imagine, and your life is a reflection of that love. May God bless you and keep you, always.